And now I'm in. Okay, so today we are really pleased to have Liezel van Arkel with us at Supervision. She's a big friend of Aephoria Partners. And today she'll be talking about the link between OD and coaching. I'm going to hand over to you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And as always, organization development, not organization design. In the 10 years that I've been with Worldview Academy, it's been confused quite a few times. We'd be invited to tender or to come for briefings or whatever, and it's actually an org design project more than an organization development project. But I think just the background in terms of why this is such a hot topic for me at the moment. Worldview Academy is an OD school. We are registered with the Department of Higher Education, and we have a qualification in organization development and change. And we see ourselves as really specializing in OD, but in a broader sense. So the whole spectrum of what OD covers. We have off-the-shelf OD interventions, which some people hate, and they think there's no such thing and it can't work. And we obviously customize things. We have the OD school where we teach and train OD to people. Most of our students are HR people who wants to expand their scope into OD, or L&D people who wants to move into OD, or organizations who are starting an OD department that wants to upskill people. And in the past 18 months, what I've noticed is that a lot of our partner organizations and ourselves are struggling. We are struggling to get work. We are struggling to get business in. We know we are needed, or we think we know we are needed. We feel very sure about that, but the business is not coming in. And you know, we started thinking, why is that happening? So we've had so many conversations about what does OD look like now? Is it still relevant? Do we have to rethink OD? Do we have to redefine how OD is done? But then there's also so many definitions of OD that it's quite difficult to think about what about OD should we change if it's not even a agreed upon definition. So I'm going to show you a little video in a bit about Chris Worley, who's a Master of Science in Organizations at the Pepperdine University, and they have a really cool OD department there. His thoughts on the definition of OD, I'll share that video with you in a bit, and then I'll share some other thoughts with you. But I think we first need to check in. So I want to ask you to talk. I think I'm going to put you into 3 breakaways. Gabby, we're just going to mute you. I'm going to put you into breakaways of 3, I think will work with the numbers we are, to just have a conversation. And my 2 questions to you is, the first one, in the invitation you would have seen I made a statement. I said quite often it feels to me like OD and coaching are sitting in 2 different corners of the same room looking at each other, not necessarily knowing whether they belong together. There's different opinions about that, but let's take that as a statement from me. And then my second statement is, in the past year or 18 months, it feels to me like coaching as a profession is on the up. The people that I know that are coaches, or they're getting business in, and it works online. It's worked online even before COVID, and it's picking up, while OD is very unsure of itself. And I think, you know, there could be reasons, like one of the things that I've been experiencing in the past few months is that HR is just so overwhelmed that if I see HR as my client in a specific organization because they're responsible for leadership development, they can't talk to me about leadership development at the moment because it's just been too hectic. So, you know, that can be one of the reasons, but I think there are many. So OD being unsure of itself, coaching on the up, and what is that link between the 2? And in that conversation, I'd also like to explore, do you think of yourself as an OD practitioner, and why? Okay. I'm going to just create the breakout rooms. I think that works nicely. Yeah, and I think like a 15-minute conversation for that one with 3 people per room should be good. Cool. There you go. Your invitation should come up. Gabby, are you there?
I am here.
Did you get the invitation to join the breakaway room?
I think maybe I pressed the wrong button. Let me come in again.
If you go to the bottom of your screen where there's the 3 buttons that says more, click on that.
Yeah.
And then click on breakouts and see if your invitation isn't sitting there.
No.
No? Are you gonna, okay, yeah, because on my screen, it just says you've not joined. So I can't invite you again.
Let me see, there's something else. Unfortunately, I can't be here for the whole session. Is this going to be recorded?
Yeah, it's being recorded.
It is being recorded.
And so the breakout rooms worked out a little bit weird because I had 334, but then Gabby dropped off.
Okay.
And we turned out 432. But hey, it is what it is. Beatrice has taught me that whoever shows up needs to be there. So I believe the universe wanted you to have the conversations that you had. So maybe we can have some feedback from the different rooms. What happened? There was one with Andrea, Christu, you, and Megan in it. What did you guys talk about?
Yeah, what was interesting is hearing from Megan's experience in the US compared to South Africa, and how she was saying that a lot of people are leaving their jobs and they're finding that that's a lot of what they're dealing with as coaches. And that there's a big focus on working with the individual in the system, and coaches actually supporting them, trying to support organizations to get them to stay. And we were saying that we're not seeing the same in South Africa, that we feel people are kind of holding on to the opportunities they have. Yeah, so that was one thing that came up.
In our group, Anne is in a business that has the 2 inextricably linked. So Anne, don't you want to share?
Yeah, I was just saying, in our business, Thoughtsmiths, we have the OD and the coaching side, and we do expression, Liezel, about sitting in the corners of the room looking at each other is not our experience, because they are inextricably linked and support one another, and we sometimes find the entry point to one and the other comes in, or vice versa, but they really are working very much in a complementary way. And sometimes I can hardly see the difference. I would say very often I see coaching as integrally part of the OD processes we're involved in. And OD comes out of the coaching. If you're coaching the CEO and then you discover what's going on in the organization, the next thing you're involved in some interventions and processes, which go on for years sometimes. So my experience and our experience isn't at the corners of the room. We see them more as being real partners and complementary and supportive of each other. But it takes some education sometimes, and we're finding with coaching, for example, in the early stages of being a coach, 15, I don't know, 18 years ago, whatever, there was a lot of education needed. And people, I was just saying in the group, people used to go, oh no, we do coaching mentoring. And it's like one word, coaching mentoring. And then they're not doing coaching, they're doing mentoring and they think it's coaching. So there was a lot of education that was needed, but we're finding much less of that now, where certainly in South Africa, organizations, the bigger ones and not so big, are much wiser about what coaching actually is, what to expect, how it's going to work, So yeah, I was interested in your picture of the corners of the room.
I think some of that came from there's been quite a few conversations over the past 18 months about that I've been in, and some of them feel that they are separate, and some people feel that they're not. And I mean, the way you explained it now, yes, it makes sense. Me and Christy were just working on a very big leadership development proposal for a municipality in Namibia, and the leadership development program is leadership development and coaching, and that's it. It's not either or. So they want to see an integrated 2-year plan, and it makes sense. The other thing that I sometimes think of, Anne, is the difference between team coaching and what OD does, come in with a process with some slides kind of thing, and team coaching.
It's interesting for me, so I'm a qualified industrial psychologist, and what we were taught, and the way in which I view it is, I mean, everyone's entitled to their view and their perspective, but for me, it's like we always go with the levels of intervention. So individual, team, and organizational. So it's a systemic view. And for me, OD looks at the system and intervene, and then zooms on the different levels and implements interventions based on the diagnosis or needs of the organization at the time. And for me, coaching, be it team, leadership, or individual coaching, is an intervention. I don't really, in my opinion, I don't really see it as OD. I would separate the two. I think the two of them work well together, and that they help each other be successful. But again, my personal opinion is that coaching and OD are two. OD is a process, coaching is an intervention, but that's just me. That's how I make sense of it in my brain. But again, that's just my opinion.
Maybe on that, one of the interesting things that came up in our discussion was this, with the increased awareness of the complexity and the entanglement of the systemic factors, there's almost this atomization. And there's almost a perception that when you go into the coaching space, it's easier to get some traction, to be able to show some progress, whereas people feeling overwhelmed with the complexity of the systemic nature of it. And so there's this interesting almost dynamic of the defenses that are happening in organizations as systems themselves, and this almost this fantasy that you can go at an individual level and kind of make traction there. And then there was also this the sense around how at the same time that's almost like we've misplaced where the intervention needs to happen. So Megan, building a bit on what you were talking about, that lack of clarity and blurring of those boundaries.
The thing is, we can't, so with the company scaling as quickly as it is, and with our goal to go overseas, it doesn't help us to, we can work on an individual level on a case-by-case basis, but what we are trying to do is we're trying to empower our teams to be personal masteries. Okay. We're trying to empower every individual on a team to be a personal master, or to embody personal mastery, and then also each team to be self-organized. Because if we go on an individual level, it's just not going to be scalable. It's not going to be realistic. We can't do one-on-ones throughout the company. So we need to empower teams and leaders to do that on an organizational systemic level. And we do that through coaching, but there's also other interventions that OD can suggest that we also implement.
Any other thoughts? Yeah, Sabine.
Yeah, maybe just to chip in on behalf of Rikus and I, we were in a two-person group. We are both, like, neither of us is from an OD background or is doing OD work. So that was a really interesting discussion. And we did take the liberty to expand a little bit or to talk about other things as well. And we just have a lot of questions. And I think some of it came up already. Like, my assumption around the relationship between coaching and OD would be what Anne was just speaking to, that they work very closely together, are very complementary. So for me also, when I saw your piece of writing about today, like they're very different and can be seen as very separate, I found that a very interesting statement. So it's yeah, helpful to hear what everyone thinks about that. And Rikus and I, we had similar questions around, you know, where does OD start and where does it end, and how does it relate to the concept of team coaching? So kind of, you know, definitions and boundaries around that. And I work as a coach, so I'm really interested to see and to hear ideas, as at some point I'd like to expand my work into, I don't know what to call it yet, but maybe organizational development or team coaching. So to learn from people that do have experience in that field here today. So that's what where we were coming from.
Right, thank you. I think on that note, let me play you the video with what I think is a very nice, robust definition of OD. Beatrice, you first shared it, I think, on LinkedIn. And I think it's a beautiful video. Chris Worley, as I said, from the OD department at the Pepperdine University. Yeah, it's a 20-minute video that I've cut down to 10. So I'm going to show you 10 minutes of it. So it's a little bit long for a Zoom session, but I think you're going to find him very interesting.
Thanks, Mianne. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and the OD community out there about this particular subject. In this first little short segment, I'd like to talk a little bit about why we're here. This whole thing started for me in an email. I got an email from a respected colleague and friend. And in her email, she said, we need to put a task force together to talk about the definition of OD. What is OD and what are our values? And I had, you know, this sort of visceral reaction to the email. I literally sort of wanted to throw up because if I heard that question again, I thought I was going to die and shoot myself. And it was a question that just kept coming up over and over again from different people and at different times. And I just had this reaction to go, oh no, not again. You know, can't people go find, there's definitions everywhere. Why don't they go read them? It's simple. It's the values are listed everywhere. And I just had this reaction. I said, I can't do this. And so I started sharing my concerns with a colleague, Anne Fireherm at Pepperdine University. And I was telling her about, you know, this is just driving me crazy. Why are people asking this question? And Anne looked at me and she said, you know, Chris, you know, a lot of people just can't afford your textbook. And the whole notion that there are new people coming into the field all the time, and there is no easy place for them to figure out what it is or what the values are behind it. And of course, you know, I sat there with, you know, chewing on my pride for thinking, you know, in such arrogant thoughts, like everybody should know what the definition is. And so when I was talking with Mianne about different things about the field, she and I decided that it would be a really good thing to have a very short, crisp discussion about what is OD and what are the values of the field. And I'd like to do that in sort of a provocative way. I'd like to poke fun at our field and our profession for not knowing some of these answers. And my promise to you is to be as neutral as I can. I have my own opinions about a lot of this stuff, but for those people who are particularly new to the field, I want to do my absolute level best to be objective, neutral, and give you a sense about what the field is about and what the field believes, without getting into too many of my own opinions. Sometimes they may leak out, and I will try and be clear about that. But that's the purpose of this short video, and I want to just sort of share my perspectives on this subject. The truth is that there are a lot of definitions out there. There's some old ones, there's some relatively new ones. And the truth of the matter is they're all the same. They differ in some particulars. Some may focus on process, maybe more than content. Some may, look at different kinds of impacts they're trying to have on the effectiveness of the organization or its culture. Some, a real common right now is the difference between diagnostic and dialogic OD. But at the end of the day, if you look at all of them, they're all the same. And so one of the things that I hope you take away from this little short video is it's okay. The definition of OOD is alive and well. It's widely shared. And I think it's important to understand and recognize that there's a lot of work to be done. The world needs what we do as organization development practitioners, and we should be careful about wasting our time, ticking away at the margins and the nuances when those aren't the things that matter. What matters is we share this sort of sense of what the field is about and go out and do it, okay? So if you look across these definitions, I think there's 3 or 4 things that you'll find that are the same across all definitions of OD. First, it's an applied behavioral science, right? And by itself, that encompasses quite a bit. You have psychology, social psychology, anthropology, sociology, economics. There's a lot of things that come under the umbrella of behavioral science and social science. And traditionally, I think we've come out of a psychology and social psychology perspective, but all of those disciplines contribute to what we're trying to do. We take a behavioral science perspective on the way organizations are run. Okay, and so that's the first thing that I think is common across all definitions. I think the second thing that's common across definitions is that in the field of organization development, what we're trying to do is build capacity in the organization. We are, through our behavioral science, we're trying to transfer knowledge and skill to the client system, so that they are better able to handle change and improvements and development in the future on their own, right? So the way we conduct our work is done in such a way that we're transferring that knowledge and skill. We're equipping the organization to be more able to handle change in the future. We're working ourselves out of a job, as it were. A lot of people talk about it that way. I think the third thing that's important is that organization development is a process of change. We are trying to change the organization. And if you think about that in comparison to other fields, innovation, management consulting, continuous improvement, we are actually intervening in the system. And that's a bit of an arrogance. There's a bit of an arrogance about organization development, because what we talk about is understanding the system and then intervening in the system in order to improve it by working with people, systems, and processes to increase the effectiveness. And one of the things that I think is important about this piece of process of change is we are focused on both the content and the process. We're trying to change something in particular, the way people interact, how engaged they are, how empowered they are. We're intervening to improve the incentive systems and the reward systems, the performance management systems. We may be intervening to create a vision and a strategy for the organization. We may be intervening in order to change the structure and the power relationships inside of an organization. So it's a pretty broad issue in terms of the process and content. It's also important to understand that organization development is not change management. And if you want a really good sort of deep dive into that subject, I highly recommend Warner Burke's video on this topic in this series, because he really goes into it, and I think explains that pretty well. For me, one of the most important pieces in the distinction between change management and OD is that change management does not include a diagnostic step, right? And it's important, if you're thinking about organization development, that you are understanding the system that you're going to intervene in, its strengths and weaknesses, and working from that understanding and doing an appropriate diagnostic to understand what is it that's working and not working in the organization, so that you can develop the organization and, kind of in the words of Ed Schein, take the right, best next step in terms of building out an organization. Lastly, I think one of the common things about all the definitions of organization development is we are trying to improve the effectiveness of the organization. And effectiveness is itself a pretty broad topic. It could be financial performance, cost reduction, productivity. It could also mean empowerment, stakeholder satisfaction, customer satisfaction, ESG goals, environmental, social justice, ecological objectives. So the notion of effectiveness is pretty broad, and the field is really interested in trying to make organizations more effective against that broad set of criteria. So just as a summary, it's an applied behavioral science. We use different social sciences to try and help the organization be more effective. We're trying to build the capacity of the organization so that it can handle change more effectively itself in the future. It's a process of change and addressing some content in the organization, something about the way the organization operates. And it's about building effectiveness in a broad range of outcomes of interest to people, society, and organizations.
Okay. So yeah, I really like the way he gave that overview, because so much sits in it. The first time I heard it, I went to a list that I made for another workshop that I said, what are the building blocks of OD? And I thought he skipped a few. And then when I really thought about what sits in those 4 points of his, I do think that he didn't skip. But I want to share with you just one other view. So this is what we've just heard. I'm not going to go through that again. That's what Chris Worley says, the 4 points of the definition of OD. Alon Shivat is a Canadian-born Israeli. We absolutely adore him at Worldsview, and he likes us back. Every single time I ask him to come and speak at one of our cafes or attend something or help me with something, he's there. And he is a straight talker. He swears on the talks, not the biggest swearer, but he doesn't care. He doesn't mind that. He is in his early 70s, I think. And I would describe him as one of the OD gurus. If you go look for him on LinkedIn, his page, it looks like nothing. And he's got a blog. He does two things. He's got a blog, and then he's got this little HR persona, Gloria Ramsbottom. And since he's been meeting me and Chris too, he's decided to add a van in there, because all the South African surnames has a van. So it's now Gloria Van Ramsbottom. He does a satirical sketch with her every week, so it's worth going and looking for that. He's also, if you want to see a bit more of him having discussions with us in South Africa on the Worldview YouTube channel, I think there's 3 or 4 OD talks already that we've loaded, where we've challenged him in terms of what is the role of OD now in the world. So there's quite a few discussions, but so the 5 points I've chosen to put on here today is just to be a little bit provocative, because that's the way he writes. This specific blog of his has 10 points, and I chose these 5 to not to make it too long. But I love the first one. I think it's just so beautiful. The most important value OD brings is to the table is the ability to get competent people to cooperate. That's kind of, you know, we call it team development. That's how he calls it. And then he goes on to say, OD does not and cannot change culture. OD can get organizations to do things differently, which may change culture. Okay. OD is an art form that clicks through to another blog. And in that blog, he talks about there's always a little bit of magic. And he talks about the process of getting OD work and then getting the client brief and then contracting about the specific outcomes and steer clear of procurement. Make sure you contract with a person that understands OD. And remember, it doesn't always work out that way. And one of the points he makes is make yourself easy to fire, because then you don't have to be too clear on the outcomes, because there's always a bit of magic. OD doesn't, it's not a straight line where we say, we're going to do this. Behavioral outcomes will be this by that date, and then. Fourth one, OD products are saleable, but for the most, they are commercialized crap. Now, that makes me wonder about things like Worldview's flagship 9 conversations in leadership that we're so proud of, off the shelf. Apparently, it's commercialized crap, but anyway. And then he says the results of OD are real, but they're not measurable. And that also clicks through to another one of his blogs where he talks about it's difficult to say exactly what's going to happen in the end, to make exact promises of, you know, culture change, or when we work with this team, this will happen afterwards. And then, sorry, it's not 5, it's 6. OD is a process. The goals of the process are not known a priori, or before the time. So any statement or scope of work that you need to provide at the outset may be meaningless within a few weeks. Be very careful about what you promise your clients. So a few nice statements there from Alon. So I want to go back to breakaway rooms to just have a discussion about what you heard. What came up for you in the video? What did you agree with, didn't agree with? Did you think anything was missing? What did you think of Alon's points? And do you have any thoughts at the moment about how do OD survive in the current context? Or how does OD make its relevance known in the current context? Anything that came up for you during the videos, or maybe just during the conversations that you're about to have? I'm going to reshuffle the breakaway rooms quickly. Go. And we'll do another 15 or so minutes. Let's hear from Alistair, Rikus, and Sabine's room first.
Should I talk? Do you want to talk?
Please, Sabine.
We had a really nice conversation, and I think there was a lot of also getting to know each other a little bit better. None of us would qualify ourselves as OD practitioners, and at the same time we were very happy with receiving those very clear definitions from both Chris Worley and Alan Shivat. So we talked about some aspects of that. I think mainly, like Alistair spoke a little bit about how diagnostics is an important bit that comes up in his work. And then we actually started talking quite a lot about Alistair's work. He explained like how he does race work and diversity and inclusion, and both Rikus and I were really intrigued by that. So we kind of took it into a different direction. But just as a little bit maybe looking from the sidelines onto this topic, it was just really useful to receive these definitions and boundaries around it. Oh yeah, and we did actually we were all really skeptical around the notion of, what was it? OD cannot be measured. Results of OD are real but not measurable. And we were just talking about like, it should be possible to measure something and to go at it from a qualitative data perspective, and to have, reviews and surveys, and at least measure something, even if the goal is not as predictable, but when you finish, you should be able to, scale something the same that you do with personal development and coaching. It's all very qualitative data, but doesn't mean it's less measurable. So we were curious around what the backing is behind that statement, and whether people in this space would agree with that and why.
Yeah, well, let's hear. Sabine, on our OD qualification, one of the modules that I teach is business acumen for OD and HR people. And the main thing that we do there is, how do you measure the results? So how do you, like, let's say you're in L&D and you want to sell training to a sponsor in the organization. How do you show them that there is return on investment without it becoming a mathematical issue? So I'm also, that one made me very uncomfortable. I'm with you. No. Does anybody want to respond to Sabine?
I don't know, I agree and I disagree with that statement. I think I agree with that statement in the sense that sometimes OD, or the things that OD does, is not measurable, and it's a feeling and emotions. As much as you would want to try and quantify whether it's qualitative or quantitative. It's very difficult sometimes to bottle up a feeling. I don't know how to, that's just my opinion. And then, yes, I think it is measurable in the sense that sometimes there are things that you can quantify, like, did this work or not? Like, if you want to instill a performance culture or a culture of feedback, or so, I mean, for example, we're trying to instill a culture of performance feedback, and we've put in place this solution or intervention, whichever word is preferable for some people. But at the end of the day, like, the mere fact that, we've done a round of it, and now we have teams who are begging us, now they are actually going and starting to implement it continuously within their team without us having to do anything. They literally are running these things themselves. For us, that in itself is measurable. I mean, prior to that, they didn't have conversations about performance or ask for feedback on how are they doing from a performance as well as a soft skills, like team building or team awareness point of view. And now they are, and for us, we feel like we've now instilled the thing that we wanted to instill. So that can definitely, from a qualitative point of view, and even if we put out a survey, would definitely be able to measure from a quantitative perspective. I guess at the end of the day, it depends what you're trying to do. If you're trying to change culture, sometimes that's a bit more of a feeling that you can't always bottle up. If you're trying to change performance and all of that, that's something you can quantify. It's really difficult because it depends on, I personally think it depends on what you're trying to do.
I think what we've got to be careful of in this question is what is the purpose of the measurement? Because measurement of itself is very meaningless. And if, well, what I interpreted the statement as being is that, can you directly correlate the action with the outcome? And in complex entangled systems, you'll never know that the thing you did was the thing that actually catalytically unlocked the thing. So there's lots of things you can measure. They're all a bit of seeing through the glass darkly, because they're all hints and clues at something that is their relationship. But one of the biggest challenges is this underlying assumption of almost linear causality, that if I do this input, I get this output, I do this action, I get this reaction. And I think, you know, what tends to happen in organizations is when the results come, if they're positive, everyone's claiming credit for them. And if they're negative, everyone's heading for the exits. And those who were most responsible then get burdened with responsibility for it. And so I think the thing here is, you know, it's when we can let go of that ownership of, in the sense of we're responsible for creating that shift, the measurement takes on a different dimension, because no longer are you trying to do that. The measurement then becomes much more a sensing of what dynamics are alive in the organization, what is happening real time, and then the ability to start to put experiments in and just say, do I see any shift in relation to that? You know, it's, I think we've almost got confused with the medical metaphors of once the doctor hits you with the antibiotics, you must now respond to the treatment. Whereas I think a lot of these things, you have these cocktails and you don't actually know what's doing it. It's almost a bit of that quantum physics. It's the minute you start to observe through the measurement, everything's shifting around that. And so the measurement itself is not objective.
And there's also there's always lots of things happening. So can you really identify the thing that made the difference? We have, for example, in one of our team development interventions, purposeful teams, we do the first day starts with somebody senior to the team, external to the team, coming in to mandate the team. So, you know, whatever, some people don't like the word mandate. It's what is the purpose of this team? Why does this team exist? And how does it fit into the bigger picture of the strategy of the organization? And sometimes just getting them to prepare 3 or 4 slides and a 15 or 20 minute talk on that is the intervention, or kicks off a bunch of stuff that changes, because suddenly they realize, but have they ever thought about, can you, you know, and we usually cause raucous with people having to suddenly now come and address this team and explain to them why do they exist and how do they fit into the bigger strategy. And that is already poking at something that's going to have ripple effects way down the line. It might even cause a big restructure if I start thinking that way. So yeah. No. You and, oh, Sabine, yes.
Can I just follow? Thank you, Megan and Hugh, for expanding on that. That was really interesting. So Hugh, I love how you described that, you know, the quantum physics of it, and you can never really attach that causal relation necessarily to what you have done in an intervention or in that kind of work. So how would you, for the lack of a better word, then work around selling that? Like how, knowing that, of course, is so valuable, and knowing that that's your work, and it really links to that concept of it's an art form almost. How do you work with that in terms of selling it?
Sabine, assuming you want me to answer the question personally, so I'm very fortunate in the sense I haven't had to, and I fully comprehend the practical realities of doing it. So I guess what happens is you attach to whatever metrics and things are out there. I mean, in my own environment, I continually come up against this pressure of what are the outputs of it, and I haven't. So I've rather pushed back to say you need to trust. You need to understand that we unleash it. And so I work in an organization as opposed to selling product to an organization. And what was interesting for me in my personal performance feedback in the prior year was my boss said, I can't actually tell what you're doing, but I can feel it all over. And that was beautiful, because he said, you know, the thing, and maybe this is underneath your question, I think one of the biggest struggles with organizations is this pressure to deliver quick results. The cycle of this work is, there is stuff that will show up quickly, potentially, depending on what the thing is. But in the main, anything sustainable is much more organic and takes its own time to do. And so part of his other feedback to me was, I would have liked you to deliver stuff a lot quicker. But I can see now that it's all there, but maybe not in the way I did. So there was a real shifting of his own expectations around what are the time horizons for it. And the problem when you're in an organization that has, you know, quarterly or annual time horizons for measurement of everything, and you're trying to almost frame something that is not like that, you end up in the tension that you're articulating. And you know, to be honest, for some, if you can get access to the work and you dress it up as being something else, and that this is a measurement that comes from it, it could be an employee engagement score, it could be whatever, that's fine if it gets you access to do the work. So I don't have a good answer to your question, Sabine, but sorry about that.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that as well. I totally agree with you, Hugh, because I'm external and have been involved in OD for a long time, 30 years or so. But you actually have to sell trust, which is a really hard thing to sell because they don't know you. So you have to sell something, something that lands with them and lights their fire. It's, for me, if it's not in relationship, I don't know how you do it, because of the very nature of the evolution of what's going on in the organism. So yeah, for me, very organic, very relational, 30 years of co-creating together, partnering together. For me, that's the ideal. You know, I don't want to go and do a thing and then move out and go and do another thing with somebody else. I'd rather have a smaller client base that's deep. But to sell OD, I think, is incredibly difficult. You've got to sell something that is needed and where you can talk their language and they understand what it is. And yes, maybe it is measurable. I think it comes back to the dialogic and the diagnostic, though. And we were a little bit of our conversation with Christo and who left just now. We were just saying that you know, the whole disruptive aspect of OD work, which can be quite disruptive and, in a sense, needs to be disruptive. There needs to be a holding space and a trust element that it's okay to work in that way. And I'm not sure, and this was something else that we were discussing in our group, if an OD consultant can be really effective if they are not post-conventional in the maturity level. Certainly from a dialogic approach, to have that open space of saying, well, where's this going to go? We'll take an organic approach, and it's kind of been how I've worked.
And I'm wondering what else happened in your organization, your conversation in your group.
Ask Christo. He found it interesting.
Is Christo still awake?
I find it interesting. But you must remember that my memory is severely constrained at this particular point. I think I said when I said earlier about the conversations, I think all the conversations so far have been really, really very interesting. I think from our conversation, and probably the other conversations as well, what really strikes me is go in and do the coaching. Do the coaching. That is what it is to do it, and establish the relationship with the organization in that way. I think sometimes as an OD company, we don't necessarily think about how you enter the system. And the cases where it works, it's really amazing. Like you go in, you do some teams in a business, so on. The small OD, not the big OD, not are we going to change the whole culture, which is in any case ridiculous, and not all of that large scale stuff. You know, we're going to change the whole leadership culture, but to work in a way that I think needs to be much more agile. That's more agile. That's the sense that I get from what you said, and it's sort of like you're in there, and then you connect more in the organization, and there's different kinds of things that need to work. So, and that comes back to the maturity thing. I mean, is what sort of frameworks are we taking to the organizations? Are we taking like specialist frameworks, etc.? What sort of frameworks can we take to the organization? And that's why I like Alon's thing about art, because that says to me also, as a facilitator or an early practitioner that comes from a post-conventional center of gravity, what sort of permission do I give myself to be gently post-conventional with the whole organization, and to bring them along on the journey? So there's something for me about that. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. That was remarkably clear for your state of being, health. Thank you. Alistair, you've been very quiet. What are you thinking? What happened in your conversation?
Okay, so sure. About post-con and conventional thinking, when I did level 2 training, they said if you're post-con, you can access the earlier stages. It's not like you're going to be on this wave and then everybody's back there. You kind of have to go back because you have it in your body or your brain or wherever. Then you operate at that level, and maybe take them to the next stage. That's kind of what came up for me. And as someone who is proudly conventional on the specializing stage, I will say measurability is important, because not just for the entity, but for yourself as well as the OD practitioner. Like, how do you know what you did works? And I was listening to a podcast recently, and this lady was saying what's important is how you define the problem. And it goes back to diagnostics, what this guy was saying in your video. If your diagnostics are wrong, then your whole process is flawed. So I guess you kind of need that post-con thinking in designing that initial staff engagement survey. You have to be clever. And in auditing, they used to say the client always lies. So you kind of have to discern because there's people who trick the system, right, in answering those questions. But you need to understand what that question or answer actually means when it comes out there. And you interpret that data to formulate what your intervention is. I'll give you an example. level 1 of COVID, they said we need to get funding for ventilators. But just because people are not breathing, it doesn't mean that was the problem. The problem was much deeper than that. So they invested in a lot of ventilators, people kept dying, right? And that mistake is in a lot of industries. You have to distill what the core in that whole complexity. You bring in that conventional and post-con thinking into distilling what your OD intervention will be. I mean, if you asked people 2 years ago what solutions they can have, remote work wasn't a solution for them because they never thought about it, but it was there. And that's where coaching comes in. You have to kind of coach leadership into thinking outside the box, so to speak. Then they'll say, oh, we could actually, let's say the problem was rent or office space. Then you're looking to move to a cheaper place, maybe close the office and everybody works remotely. But people never thought of that. So that bit, he talks about the diagnostics in the beginning. And in the beginning, you kind of need to spend a lot of time distilling the problem because you're going to be buying ventilators. And yet what you need to get for people is the anti-inflammatory stuff. What do they call it? Steroids or whatever other intervention there could be. So that's what really comes up for me around diagnostics.
I love that because thanks, Alistair, because like every client, it's like a person going to a doctor and self-diagnosing themselves. It's like, oh, but we've got an engagement problem. And so everyone's like telling the doctor that, that what you have, instead of allowing the doctor to be like, okay, listen, let's do, sure, great, listen. But at the end of the day, you need to, as a OD practitioner, like you say, look at the system from a holistic perspective and be like, okay, what is truly the problem here? Or what are the issues or pain points or hotspots or whatever you want to call, what lingo you want to use. But in terms of the selling of OD, and probably I'm going to get like a lot of people rolling their eyes now, but I'm so done with selling OD. Like if I have to sell OD, then you already have a problem because then that organization is not ready for OD, let alone are they going to stick around. Well, maybe I'm wrong again, but like it's very unlikely that they're going to stick with the process and that the process is going to be as valuable as it could be, because buy-in is really important. And I've never had to sell OD. For me, it's like, if you don't think it's important, then I don't want to be here. I don't want to have to waste my time. That's just me.
Yeah, Megan, and you touch on so many things that's been part of the conversations in the past 18 months. And now you can imagine why it's so difficult for us small consultancies to make a living at the moment, because you're saying, I'm not even going to try and sell OD. Very few people, very few organizations understand what OD actually does. And therefore they not interested or, think, what, do you really want to come talk about that fluffy stuff with us or whatever it is? So we say that it's important that OD is always issue centric, because the client will come to you with, for example, an employee engagement problem. That's a presenting problem, presenting issue. Those are the symptoms of whatever the illness is. It's not the cause of it. And sometimes some of the work that OD does is to get to the underlying issues, to the stuff under the symptoms. And that's already starting to intervene on the system to actually get to why, ask why until there's no more why left. And really, employees are not engaged, why? And wherever that takes, that conversation takes you. But I often think, and I agree with what Anne said earlier, is a lot of the times it's about the language that the client brings to you. Work with that language, and be okay with that language. And I believe a lot of the work that we do as OD is undercover work. You know, it's like, yes, we'll fix the performance of this team. Just give them to me for a little while. You know, and then you go in with the Enneagram and maturity stuff and some processes. And the conversation is not even about productivity or whatever, really. But you go in with this undercover way of the Merlin to the king, the magician type of work, and not try and explain to the head of whatever that bought this from you that this is what I'm going to do. But then again, like Anne said, they need to trust you. But sometimes what you need to say is, yes, I'll fix the performance of this team, and not try and sell OD.
I hear you, and I'm not trying to disregard what you're saying. I think, yeah, I hear you. But what I'm saying is, like, I can't wait till, I mean, how much more do we have to take? I mean, for goodness sake, with this pandemic and stuff, organizations are bleeding out. They're bleeding out. They're losing their talent. They're, I mean, anyway, all I'm saying is, like, I've got a lot of 8 in me, and I'm very grateful of how organizations don't realize that if OD is not sitting at the table, if people in culture are not sitting at the table, and they're not realizing the importance of, you know, having the value of us there, then I'm really sorry, but damn them all. They need to then go through the process of, you know, almost bleeding to death or completely dying, and then reincarnating themselves, only to realize hopefully they've learned a lesson. Because again, this pandemic is not, in my opinion, going to end anytime soon. So we need to start being more smart and less stubborn in, okay, well, let's just keep doing the same thing and hope something is going to shift. It's not. But again, I have a lot of 8 in me, and I'm just a bit annoyed with how immature some organizations can be. But I know that that's what we're dealing with, unfortunately. Very stubborn, immature systems that will continue to do the same thing over and over again, only to hope that it will change someday.
Can I add to that? I think Lucille said the other day that if an organization doesn't have at least one person at strategizing in their exec level, they're in serious trouble. And I'm talking to what Megan's saying, and I'm mixing my my language here, but you know, an organization that's red-orange, it just doesn't understand the language that one might come in, and it's coming back to the thing, talk their language. If you want to play in that organization, and you want to play with those kinds of interventions and processes that make sense at maybe a conforming or specializing level of evolution and growth, but to actually find someone in the organization, it probably is going to be around internalizing, strategizing, who's going to even begin to understand what on earth you're talking about. Otherwise, I totally agree. You know, you've got to be revolutionary and disruptive in the way you do it and come in undercover. The exciting thing, I think, is when you do find an HR person or an OD person in the organization who is at strategizing level or somewhere around there, who really gets it, and the 2 of you and the 3 and the 5 and the 6 of you can create some magic. And then I don't know whether it really matters at what level. I love the red, orange, green, teal evolutionary development of the organization too, to be knowing what are we dealing with here, and at what point of evolution is this organization, and are we just talking mumbo jumbo because we don't realize where they are in their stages of evolution. So yeah, it's a really interesting one of match and mismatch and frustration and talking past each other. I think that's part of the art form, though. If you want to say OD is an art form, part of the art form is finding the language that makes any sense to whoever you're speaking to.
Opening the conversation, being allowed to have a conversation, and then finding the language. Yeah. When Megan came in and you were all still in your breakaways right in the beginning, and I said to her what everybody's talking about, and started talking about how she sees OD, I got so excited because there's somebody that sits in an organization with the same definition of OD that, you know, she was talking levels of system, and I was like, whoa, what? and I think we all wish that there were more people that understand the magic of OD and what it can do. And I love what you said, that your boss said, I don't know what you're doing, but I can feel it all over. Yes, that's OD. Maybe we should really, I don't know, find a way to not get upset and angry at people for not understanding it, and being okay with doing undercover work and changing our language to whatever suits the client. And Alistair, when you said, you know, you have to assume that the client is always lying, and that comes from auditing, that struck a chord, because we have to go in on trust. They have to trust us. We have to teach them to trust each other, and again, so if you're entering into an auditing firm, and that's kind of something that's important to them, then interesting. Yeah. The relevance of OD still sits at a place where it worries me and it scares me, as the head of a small OD consultancy, how few people actually gets the relevance of OD. And
I think that's natural, because you're so passionate and you love what you love it. And I think we all do. And I think that's the whole point, is that, and I think that's why I get angry, and I probably should learn to work on that, which I am busy with. But the thing is, that's why I mean, Anna and Liezel and everyone else, I take my hat off to you. I mean, undercover work, I've done that for the past 10 years and I'm already grateful of it. So I obviously need to work on my patience. I know that. But I think for me, it's also just like, how are you not getting it already? But I know it takes time. I always say like patience and persistence with people, but I don't always practice what I preach. But yes, OD is a beautiful thing. And it's also something you can't bottle either, because it's so different for every organization. I was saying in our breakaway rooms, like you read case studies about OD interventions and you can't mimic often how one organization got it right compared to another, because it's so unique to the culture and the people and the values of that organization. So that's why I'm saying, like, I think we're all passionate. We love it so much because it is so magical to see it unfold. And when you do get it right, it's such a wonderful feeling. You just want to keep chasing that. I just wish organizations, I can't wait for the penny to drop, but I think that is going to still take a bit of time. Unfortunately, a pandemic is not going to be that one catalyst for everyone, only some.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many things to say about that, you know, I think there was so much fallback in terms of maturity because of this pandemic, because of the anxiety of the pandemic. That also caused some less, like literally, we got to keep the operations going. Can you stop trying to fix my people? We've got to operate. We've got to find a way to still keep the warehouse open and work in our bubbles or whatever it is. And fall back into specializing or whatever it is that they needed to survive in that moment. You know, the personality is a defensive structure.
Definitely, ego fixation is what protects us. And I think a lot of people went back into their little cages, hovels, whatever you want to call it, because they needed to protect themselves and the organization. But I think that's also what OD teaches us, is that we need to sometimes look past the short-term clutter and understand what the bigger picture and the long-term you know, game plan is, because this will pass. This may be the new normal, but then how do we continue to live and work and thrive in this setting? And I think that's something that OD will help leaders and teams of today to do, because if this is our new normal, how do we navigate that? But I think all of us have been thinking about that at this stage.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, and that's one of the frustrations at the moment, is OD is long term, and people are thinking short term in terms of survival at the moment, and I think it has been ignored. 18 months is a long enough time to ignore something. To now already see. We had a session on Friday morning with it was a mix of people, and there was somebody there that works in Empath, and he's a lover of OD. He's a real evangelist, like we are. And we were testing. We were like, what is it that OD can still offer the corporates? What is the language that is? What are the things keeping them up at night, and the language that we can use to get them to open a newsletter or to, you know, whatever. And he said to me, teams in distress. That is the big topic. And you know, immediately I'm thinking, okay, cool, because that's what we do. You know, we can help teams who's in distress. But now that you said that, that's exactly it. At the moment, the big hot topic in a lot of corporates is teams are in distress. Why? Because you didn't bloody listen to us OD people 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months ago, did you? You know? So there you go, Megan, bleeding out.
And as I'm listening to the medical metaphors, it strikes me that OD people seems to be the vets of the business world. So if you're a doctor, then you have a patient that you can reason with, and the patient can know there's some connection between what the doctor does and what the outcome does. If you have a cat or a dog, there's none of that understanding. So
Oh, I love that.
what are the tools that vets have? They can either knock them out or they can deceive, I suppose. I'm trying to think what the alternatives are. And it's tricky to knock a company out. I can't think of a way to do that. So I suppose deception remains then.
It's a beautiful analogy, and it makes me think. So I appreciate that. If that's the only thing tonight that I'm lying in bed thinking about, like, what tools do you get? Yeah, no, that's amazing. I love that.
We're coming to the end of our time. I love this conversation. Does anybody have any closing remarks, closing thoughts? No. Okay. Yes.
Can I just ask you a question? As you opened these conversations and you set some parameters around it, what are you leaving with?
I think I'm leaving with, there's a lot of people who feel like I do at the moment, frustrated with how hard it is to prove the relevance of OD, and that we don't have the answers. You know, I didn't come into this conversation thinking we're going to solve something, but maybe we have some bright ideas, and maybe that helps us get in undercover or whatever it is with the next client. Because I think the real pleasure in doing OD work is to see what changes, you know, to feel it all over, to to see that these teams are having the most amazing conversations, and they're implementing stuff, and they're just happier. I was very, very green in OD a few when I didn't even know the definition of OD in 2012, and quite early in working with World's View, I was asked to do an interview about what OD is, and it scared the hell out of me because, like you saw, I mean, this Chris Worley going on about how many definitions there are and how sick and tired he is of just hearing about that his whole career. And these people asked me, and the bloody video is still on our YouTube channel and our website. I hate it, but they asked me what does OD do, and give it to us in the simplest of terms. And I said, we make people happy. If we do our work correctly, then we make people happy. The shareholders are happier because the business is making more money, they're reaching their targets. The exco is happier because they're doing what they're mandated to do. The line managers are happy because they feel that they're better managers and their teams are performing better. The team members are happier because they feel that they know what's expected of them. They have a voice, there's trust, and they go home and they are happier and better parents and husbands and wives and mothers and children and whatever. And we make people happy. And I love what we do. And I really want the world to know that that's what we do. Let us in the door, you know. I don't know if that answers you, Sabine. Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming and playing with me in this sandpit of what OD is and exploring. I really enjoyed the conversation. If anything comes up for you, let me know. Let's continue this conversation. Yeah, and just thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for hosting
Thanks,
the
Liezel. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Cheers.